This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on India's commitment to clean energy transition. The participants are Mukul Samwal, environmentalist, and S. Rangabasham, Akashvani correspondent.
We have with us Mr. Mukul Sanwal, former diplomat, to discuss the issue of India's commitment to clean energy. Mr. Sanwal, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you.
To start off with, the commitment of 65% of our power generation from non-fossil fuel by the year 2030. So just a matter of 7 more years. This, figure of 65% and more, how achievable is it?
See, when we look at these figures, one must look at it in their context. The most important context is that India, unlike other developed countries or even many other countries which are not of this size or population, is still spreading modern energy throughout the country. In our remote villages and among the poor, even the cities, they do not have access to modern energy. By modern energy, I mean electricity for lighting, gas for cooking, and some kind of basic transport facilities and housing. Now the question is that why do we need energy? We need energy because energy is not electricity. Energy is not just transportation, but energy is also steel, cement and infrastructure. Steel and cement need huge quantities of energy in their processing. So when we talk of urbanization, when we talk of middle class living, it is not just the financial aspect that is important, it is also an energy aspect that is important, because all that is not possible without extending modern energy to these people. You cannot achieve middle class status without modern energy, because you will not have a modern house, you will not have infrastructure, you will not have cities, not have transport, and you will not have basic amenities like refrigerator. The concept of replacing a lantern with a bulb is not about middle class levels of living. This is not what the country is aspiring to. So the question then comes is that how do we generate this kind of energy while keeping within our commitments of having a certain percentage from non-fossil fuel sources? Please remember that the country's commitment is not to reduce energy or to eliminate coal, but to have a certain percentage from non-fuel sources. Now, we know that the energy requirement is going to increase tremendously. For example, today the average Indian uses 1/10 the energy of the average American in the United States. We are not going to achieve that high level because they waste a lot of energy, but we will still use much more energy to have a comparable or comfortable middle class level of living. Now, where will that come from? Today, 2/3 is coming from fossil fuels, which includes gas and coal primarily for electricity generation. Now, the non-fossil fuel already shifted to about 43%, if we took at the total at this stage. Because fossil fuel has come down from 2/3, coal has come down from 2/3 to about 55-57%. So what is happening is, and I think this is important, it is not that we can look at one figure in isolation. When we look at the energy requirement as a whole, we see that the requirement is increasing. That increasing requirement will continue to be met by coal, but the percentage share of coal will continue to decline, because the share of non-fossil energy is going to increase more rapidly than the increase in the coal generation. I think this is important to understand, that as the pie gets bigger, each slice is also going to get bigger, but the slice that constitutes renewable energy will have a larger size than the slice of the fossil fuel energy. So we will maintain the percentage that we have committed to. Now, in this, the important issue is that we are also going in for new technology at the same time. It is not just solar and wind, which the Europeans used or other countries use in a big manner. China, United States, Europe, and other countries. We are also getting into green hydrogen, which is the non-fossil fuel of the future. And there it needs more technology. It is basically technology-driven, electrolyzing hydrogen from water.
Yeah.
It releases a lot of heat, which can be used for steel, cement, fertilizer, as well as chemical plants. So it has wider benefits than just the generation of green hydrogen.
Right. Mr. Sanwal, we are talking about, switching over from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuel. It includes, hydroelectricity, solar, wind, green hydrogen, nuclear. But all these, I'm sure you'll agree, are really capital intensive and have long gestation periods. In a country like ours, where we have, given subsidies on electricity consumption, many of the state governments give free electricity to farmers. Don't you think this entire question of affordability would really be a challenging one, not only from the individual perspective, but also from the state governments or the electricity board's perspective?
You see, there again, as I said, we have to see this in the context of the spread of modern energy in India. You are right. Take the case of the subsidies to the farmers. It's a huge burden on the state electricity boards. But then, when we are looking at modern energy in a different sense, we find that a solar energy panel can power the pumps for individual farmers. And it is happening. They don't need to be connected to the grid for pumping water. And it does not cost anything. There's an initial subsidy, but that subsidy is less than the subsidy and the electricity losses that are in long transmission lines. This is just an example. The same thing is happening in the urban areas where solar rooftop panels are spreading gradually, but now the technology has matured and one can hope to see a faster spread. And the same principle. But the question then comes is that at the one end, we have to ensure that the price paid by the consumer is reasonable or comparable with cheapest electricity source, that is coal. Now for doing that, we need to make sure that the technology that we use, because this is technology intensive, coal has to be mined, but solar, wind, and even hydro to an extent is all technology intensive. So the question comes is, how do we reduce the cost of production to keep the cost to the consumer low? And this is where I think the Prime Minister has given a clearer direction, a very clear direction, that today most of these equipments are imported from abroad. The challenge he has put before the ministries is that you give an initial subsidy, get that production here, and because we have such scale, such mass production, the price will come down. And when the price comes down, the price to the consumer will go down. So I think the vision of the Prime Minister is very clear. We have to move in this direction. We have to keep the cost low for the consumer. Let us start producing inside.
Mr. Sanwal, let's also talk about financing, which is a major stumbling block. As I said earlier also, these initiatives, whether it is solar or wind or green hydrogen, they are all capital intensive. Don't you think, financing is a major stumbling block and there needs to be some innovative model, like maybe creation of a special purpose vehicle or a joint venture or some other mechanism so that there is no dearth of financing or finances for the energy sector?
See, here the government is taking certain very innovative steps which don't look innovative because they are not modeled on the West so far. We have been copying the West, but we realize that our conditions are different, our situation is different, the scale here is different, so we need to develop our own models. Now, I find that the National Thermal Power Corporation, NTPC, which is having huge profits, Coal India having huge profits, is shifting to renewable energy. So I think the innovation of the Prime Minister is that this is not about companies producing coal or a company is producing coal-fired plants and selling electricity. They are all energy companies. So if they have profit in one part, if they can invest it in the development of renewable energy. Because all these public sector concerns had huge capital reserves which were not being deployed because they were not able to spend them in the traditional means of expenditure. And now you have new elements coming up. So as soon as production starts in the country, where the private sector who are into energy, they are all going into this production of solar panels, silicon vapors, semiconductors, other material that is required for solar energy. So here you have a very nice mix. It is a different kind of mix to the traditional public-private partnership we were used to in the past of public sector companies who are capital rich in the sense who have good reserves and can branch off from what they were doing into the related field of renewable energy. And similarly, the private sector sees a demand, so they get into production. So here you see the circle is being completed. The public sector has got the capital. They are getting into set up these plants where these big solar farms, for example, because it is easier for them to get the land. And the private sector is getting into production of the material that goes into these solar panels because they see an assured demand. So it is a different kind of public partnership and different kind of financial packages that is emerging, which just needs government to start it off. And I think that is the right approach here. Which have not been done in this kind of manner in other countries because they didn't have this combination.
Mr. Sanwal, let's also talk about, EVs or electric vehicles. There has been a clear policy push, a clear stress on, changing over from fossil fuel based vehicles to electric vehicles. We have seen, sales cross 1 lakh per month figure as well. But let me play the devil's advocate here. Critics also point out that, as and when the number of electric vehicles increases in the economy, they will have an adverse impact on the consumption of electricity, because they would at the end of the day need electricity for recharging. So that would initiate a new sub-segment of consumption, and again have an impact on fossil fuels only, because most of our power plants run on coal and gas and others. So it will again contribute to our carbon footprint. So it is, instead of directly, it is indirectly again doing the same thing.
See, it depends how we look at it. First of all, the West doesn't talk about transportation, because 1/3 of their carbon emissions are from transportation. They only talk about production of electricity. But we talk about transportation also and electricity, because both are spreading. As urbanization increases, middle class levels of income come up, both are going to increase. And when we look at transportation, the issue for us is not that we have a large number of vehicles powered by the internal combustion engine which needs oil. We are still growing the number of vehicles. And so we have a choice. They don't have that kind of choice, so they don't talk about it. It's a lifestyle issue for them. For us, we have a choice whether we push electric vehicles or we push the usual internal combustion engine with oil. And that choice in our case is dictated primarily by the fact that 80% of our oil is imported. No country wants to be dependent on oil imports. So when we look at the electrical consumption for our electricity vehicles, we have to see the import of oil. And we also have to see that yes, the oil carbon footprint is 2 times that of coal, but it is still there. So we eliminate that carbon footprint when we get into electricity, because 50% of our electricity is going to come from non-fossil fuels down the line. We have already said that that is a trend that is likely to materialize. So 50% of our energy will be electricity that we use, will be non-fossil fuel. The oil also has a carbon footprint which is half that of coal. So in balance we will see, as far as the nation is concerned, the country is concerned, oil dependence is reduced, prices come down. Because again, as demand goes up, the prices will come down. So I think the model that the government is following, and it's the clear direction of the Prime Minister, Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think here that concept becomes very, very important.
Yeah. Mr. Sanwal, before we conclude, a quick comment. What is your perception? What is your outlook? We are talking about reducing our oil imports, crude oil imports, which is at present, somewhere in the region of 80% we import our requirement. From here on, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, when do you expect to see a perceptible reduction in import of crude oil?
I think the perceptible reduction in import of crude oil will come something like 25 to 30 years, when we will find that almost all new vehicles are electric vehicles. Because the electric vehicles have achieved that standard of performance of the petrol engine. We can see that diesel, for example, the diesel cars are very popular not because of the diesel engine of those cars, but because diesel was cheaper than petrol. Then now when diesel and petrol prices have come somewhat similar, environmental concerns in cities have been imposed on diesel because diesel is more polluting as far as human health is concerned than petrol, then people have started switching to petrol. When we find that price of energy comes down, and most of this charging will be done at night. So we will soon come into a situation which exists abroad, that if you use electricity after 10 o'clock or whatever time, then the price comes down. So all of this charging, please don't forget, is going to take place at night. And as soon as the price advantage shifts and the performance advantage is narrowing down, new vehicles will all be electric. Yes, the problem will be on trucks, because you do not have that kind of engine for the heavy duty trucks, and there we are going for hydrogen in a very big way. So when I see the combination of the two, I think somewhere around 2035 or around, let's say, 2040 at the most, because of the development of technology, both in terms of the cost of these inputs as well as the performance of the vehicle.
Right.
Somewhere along there, people will stop buying internal combustion cars.
On that optimistic note, let's wind up this discussion. Mr. Mukul Sanwal, thank you so much for joining us in this program.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on India's commitment to clean energy transition. The participants were Mukul Sanwal, environmentalist, and S. Rangabasham, Akashvani correspondent. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on a mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 9289094044.